This week we have Neil Laughton in the studio. Neil is a successful entrepreneur, record-breaking adventurer, and a public speaker. In this episode, we discuss Neil's feats, such as his multiple summits to Mount Everest, as well as the lows, such as losing his father at a very young age, and how he directed his pain into realizing his purpose and achieving outstanding things. Neil, thank you very much for coming along. And I've been looking forward to talking to you because I've never really sort of talked to a real life action man before. And so I'm desperate to hear some of your remarkable stories. So as you know, the theme of this podcast is that success is not normal. Now, when I sort of read your CV, some of the things you've done, you know, you can't be normal to be sort of pushing yourselves to that sort of depth to achieve the things that you've done. What I like to do is to start right back at the beginning of people's stories. So tell me a bit, go back to your childhood. I want to try and be an amateur psychologist and sort of work out what is it that makes this man tick. So go back to your childhood. Where were you brought up? And you know.
So I was brought up in Sussex and went to a good school, but didn't excel at academia, to be fair.
Which school was that?
It was a place called Worth Abbey.
Is that like a public school type place?
A private school, yeah.
Okay. With my children, my daughter went to Sherborne and my son went to sort of Bryanston. So they been through the system. So I know what there's like.
Well, I kind of, you know, this was in the sort of mid to late 70s, early 80s. And, you know, I had a sort of bit of a culture of like the fagging and then the bullying and you know,
Did you go from the age of 7 or 11 or 13? Or
9, actually.
So you went to the age of 9.
Yeah.
Okay. So,
but I excelled in kind of sport, but not much else, and managed to very nearly burn the science lab down, and got caught doing naughty things with alcohol and parties, and got expelled, and this, that, and the other.
But
they brought me back, and you know, I was reprieved.
But I tell you what's really interesting though is that. So from the age of 9, and I've noticed this with my own children, is that you already brought up how to, you know, survive on your own. You know, it is
very independent. Yeah.
But yeah, you have to, in order to sort of survive in those sort of environments, you learn to be sort of independent. So you're in that environment. The only thing you're good at is sports.
Yeah.
And you're a bit of there's a tinge about being a naughty boy, a rebel. Did you get expelled or what?
I was expelled for organising a rave, essentially, and got. I think the worst you could receive was 8 with the cane in those days. 8
I used to be caned, actually.
Yeah,
I could remember being caned as a kid, and I was caned a hell of a lot. And I remember that
you must have been bad as well.
I was a real bad boy, and my headmaster. Actually, the worst punishment I ever had, he stopped caning me, and I had to go and stand outside of his office from 9 o'clock until 4 o'clock every day for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And I was so bored by the end of it. You know, I was, you know, I just would do anything not to happen to that. But
yeah, it was weird. Unfortunately, I've given you the name of the school, so I can't elaborate too much. But they did have there was one teacher who had different grades of planks of wood depending on the severity of the crime.
Oh God!
Reflected the density of the wood that you've been you know, caned and so forth. But anyway, I think what saved me was 2 things. One, I had a North Star, I had a direction of what I wanted to achieve when I left school eventually, which was a great help. And then I think the second thing probably was my determination to, you know, do something with my life and succeed in one form or t'other.
And what was your star? What were you aiming? What did you know you wanted to do?
I wanted to become a Royal Marine Commando. And that was because my dad was in the Navy and had introduced me in spectacular fashion to an opportunity to meet the Marines on his ship, which was HMS Bulwark. And it was doing exercises in the Solent off Portsmouth Harbour. My dad sent a helicopter to the school, picked up me and 3 mates, and we spent 3 days on board the Royal Navy's aircraft carrier, and it was an extraordinary experience that you just wouldn't be able to replicate today, health and safety and all the rest of it. So
that's really interesting. So I absolutely believe there are nugget moments that make an imprint that
Sure.
then directs where you want to be. Just to tell you a bit about my story, that I'm from a family of 11, very, very, very poor, did really badly at school, and I'm dyslexic. And my father had an allotment, and it was my job to look after this allotment as the oldest boy. And I can remember at the age of 11 making a decision that one day I'd like to own my own farm. And then every single thing that I did was always with that in mind.
And what age were you when you had that realization?
It didn't happen until I was about 35.
Oh, right. Quite late
But
then.
it was a real absolute, it was something that was a sort of driver, because I think you need to have some personal ambition in life.
Yeah.
And to have something to aim towards, because otherwise, what is the sort of point, really?
Yeah. Well, my opportunity came at the age of 12. And so from 12 to when I left school at 18, no university for me, because obviously that wasn't going to work out particularly well with my academic record. But I had that goal, and that was brilliant.
So 12-year-old, you knew what you wanted to do, so you were desperate to get away from school then, I presume.
Yeah.
And then what happened?
Well, I went travelling. Before I learnt to drive, I was parachuting out of aircraft at the age of 16 with the Marines, cadets or whatever, and eventually got my call-up papers and joined.
But you're saying this as though it's a normal thing to do.
Well,
As 16-year-old jumping out of planes, I mean, well, what was that like? I mean,
terrifying, but one puts one's fear aside and
No,
go
look,
for it. You
I'm-
trust in others and the system and your parachute, and you learn the rules of the game, and you leap out of an aircraft.
I ain't gonna let you skirt over it. Like, you're too English about, one just gets around to it. You got to think about it. For a 16-year-old, could you remember the first time you did your first jump?
Yeah, just about. I remember the course. I don't remember necessarily I might have been sort of slightly demented at the time, but I do recall the course. And boys were landing on aircraft hangars instead of where we should have been landing in the field. And one poor chap landed on the roof of the building and had to stay there for 6 hours. Nobody could work out how to get him down. I was lucky. I had 6 or so good jumps, no problem.
But I tell you what's interesting about this, and as a metaphor, starting your own business or going on a journey for that's really innovative is like taking your first parachute jump. It is sort of jumping into the unknown. It is like
Taking a leap of faith.
taking a leap of faith.
Yeah, you bet.
It's about going against all your instincts, about holding on to your fear. To be successful in life, you've got to be able to go through all of these sort of hurdles, and that's why I'm quite interesting about why is it some people are able to do that, but some people wouldn't. They wouldn't jump out of that plane, as it were. What do you think? What does a person possess to allow them to close their eyes and jump?
I think there's ambition, there's drive, there's determination, there's actually, the reverse of fear. It's actually overcoming. Some people find the opportunity to counter their fear exciting, challenging, and rewarding, as I have discovered. Putting myself in danger throughout my life and career at various stages actually does provide some interest and some good experiences, I think.
So for you, because you've done a lot of things that most people would just not put themselves in, what does it give you? Why do you do it?
Well, I think there's an element of the chemicals, the endorphins of the rush of an exciting thing to do, whether it's bungee jumping, parachuting, or flying an aircraft upside down. And then there's just the perception of doing something that's different, unique, extraordinary, that is the rich tapestry of life. And some people, and I accept that a lot of humans just prefer that cozy environment and the safe environment, so to speak, relative of sitting on a bar stool on a Friday night. My personal preference is doing something a bit more engaging and entertaining and physically challenging.
So is it all personal, or is there another end to it? Is it like, I suppose it's like running a marathon. I'm always surprised. Why do people put themselves to the pain of running a bloody marathon? I would never do that, because
It's a challenge.
a personal challenge to say
It's a
that.
personal challenge, and it's an experience. I've run lots of marathons. It's not my favourite thing to do, but you're part of the camaraderie of the event and raising money for charity, and maybe having an entertaining time with the people that you run with, your team. The training element, also allows you to lose some weight that sometimes accumulates.
And one of the things you've said a couple of times is being part of a team.
Yeah, I've never really done anything on my own solo. I mean, I've got some great explorer mates who love to pull a sled to the North Pole solo, unsupported. I can't think of anything worse, really. I mean, I'd probably be quite independent from my experiences, and I'd survive it and I'd do it. But would I enjoy it? Probably not as much as doing something similar with others. And I think that's the key part.
And is the teamwork that you all having to endure and overcome? Is that part of...
I think you get strength from having good people around you. Sometimes life gives you a bad apple and you have to overcome not such great team players, but that's life, isn't it? But so, I think overall the experience of doing exciting things with others, whether it be starting a business or climbing Everest, is best done with good people, good friends.
And so you joined the Marines, and then what?
Then my dad died, and so I took
How
a
old
bit
were
of
you then when your dad
19.
died? 19.
Difficult time. Had some time off, and then things didn't work out. When one door closes.
No, but hold on. You keep going. So your dad died. It was a difficult time. Why was it a difficult time?
I think people will understand when your mentor, your father, your inspiration person in your life, dies in a not necessarily great way. Cancer. It pulls at your heartstrings, and it for me, I had a loss of confidence, lost my self-esteem a little bit. I lost focus, and it was spotted in my chosen career, and unfortunately that led to what we call in the military an interview without coffee. And so I had to leave the Marines, but if I'm allowed to skate over that, because it was a difficult time. I went to London. I knew nobody. I had a few quid in my pocket. I clocked in at a YMCA in Brixton. Survived that for a couple of years. 9 murders in my street alone during that time. And I got a job selling stationery. So it wasn't the most glorious element and time of my life, to be fair. But, I endured it. I got through it. And I found strategies to overcome.
Well, you see, when you look back at those are quite essential training, a time of training, because if you think about it, very, very painful time. And then perhaps that pain was what was preparing you and enduring that pain for what you then went on to do.
Oh, for sure.
And that's what I find quite interesting. So it's obvious that your father was a big, important influence over your life, because I didn't feel the same way about when my father died. So it's obviously you had a very close relationship then, did you?
Sure.
Yeah. And do you have brothers and sisters?
I have a younger brother, 2 years younger.
2 years younger than you then. So somebody that was a big mentor, so you lost that, and then you're on your own. And then actually, how then do you then try?
Well, we had mum. She was still around and very supportive. But for a teenager / 19, 20-year-old, your dad is up there.
Yeah, it's a big
thing.
The
most important person, I would argue, in your life, perhaps more so than your mother, who was probably more relevant and important, earlier on in one's life.
But what's really interesting then, so it had an impact, which then meant you had to leave the army, and then then not having anything, and then ending up in Brixton. Now, explain that to me, basically.
Well, I needed a job. I needed money, so I went to. I seem to remember arrived in London, not knowing where to live, who to speak to.
So why made you decide to come to London?
Well, it was the place where everyone seemed to be going, and it was the capital, and that's where the jobs were. I assumed. I had no clue.
But why?
I mean, I'd been down in Devon with the Marines, so it was just a world away from that life, and I realised I needed some money, and I opened a paper and I saw an advert, a free training course that taught you to sell. And I can't remember, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks long, but it essentially engaged you with this company. It was one of those freelance door-to-door office equipment and stationery selling businesses, all a bit of a sham. And the founding director ended up as a fraud, was about to go to prison and committed suicide in his brown Rolls Royce. So that gives you a clue the type of organisation I became a member of. But it was a stopgap. I realised that.
So it's the courage, it's the endurance that I'm really fascinated with. So you have a loss with your dad. You have a loss of the army, something that you wanted from a 12-year-old kid. You could see that that's a major shift in anyone's sort of life, and then having to reinvent yourself. You then end up doing something like a door-to-day salesman. I mean, these are big emotional shifts, and a lot of people.
But I've always been a positive person, and I knuckled down. I found ways through, got myself some accommodation, got a job. It was commission only, so unless you sold something, you didn't get paid. But I was quite successful. I was determined. I spent a few years in the Marines, so I knew my way round, and could have a conversation, knew how to look people in the eye, and I found strategies to be quite an effective cold caller and win business. And so I suddenly got money in the bank. Great, I could buy a car, Peugeot 205 GTI, as I recall, and so life was good.
Yes, but as somebody who's been through exactly the same situation, it's hard. It is tough.
Sure.
It is absolutely tough, and that's the thing that needs to be admired, because a lot of people could never endure it, really. So this is why it's quite interesting to talk to you, because all of these experiences you've taken and made something positive out of it.
Yeah.
But don't get away from the fact that we're talking about things that could destroy.
Yeah, we gloss over it, but yeah, you're right. I mean, it was tough. It was the worst phase of my life, probably. As kind of depressed as one would ever get in that situation, but I'm always a positive person, look forward rather than backwards.
And I just believe that those experiences are essential for you to then go on to do the things that you eventually went on to do. Is that
and I would argue that those failures and those disappointments were the catalyst for greater growth and success. And I'll give you 2 examples. So the first was I still had aspirations to serve my country and wear khaki and shoot guns and stuff like that. So spent a bit of time in getting some money in the bank and driving my white GTI around town, and I put my toe in the business world, so to speak. But I still had aspirations to serve country with the military. So I then signed up for reservist service with an organisation that has the motto "Who dares wins," and some would argue that regiment is even more challenging and a greater aspiration to serve in than the Royal Marines. And so I spent 12 years serving with a Special Air Service, which was fantastic, and I met some incredible and worked with some incredible people whilst I was building my new business career. And the second example was having had that sales indoctrinated experience, door-to-door office equipment selling, that led, after a few missteps and employed positions and being made redundant and fired and this, that and the other, I ended up having the experience, the confidence and the wherewithal to set up my own business and drive that from a position of strength and experience.
And what's interesting as a theme is endurance.
Or resilience, perhaps.
But it is. If you think about that theme, and that is where you're really tested. I mean, that in business as well. You know, you've got to endure, to overcome, to be resilient. And I just think it's quite interesting looking at this sort of theme of endurance and This is interesting. You use the word resilience, which is more positive than endurance, because endurance can
endure is slightly more negative than being resilient,
being resilient,
which is a positive. Yeah.
And part of the entrepreneurial mindset is to always see things positively. And negative is like a sort of, it holds one back, really.
Yeah, I think there's a distinction between being negative and obviously the opposite, positive, but being realistic. You know, as a businessman, you'll know that if you're so dogmatic in your belief that a failed strategy, you should keep going until you're bankrupt, then that's a poor place to be, I think.
Well, I think the key thing for me, and a lot of the themes that people are talking about, is the ability to pivot and pivot fast. It's to fail fast, rather than to be so fixed with an idea that it's going to take you to your grave, really. So I think it's about being able to be adapted. So you've had, as far as I'm concerned, up to now, at the age of 19, your father dying, you know, learning this stuff, really tough times, and this is all preparing you for whatever you're going to go on to. What then happens after you join the reservists? What then happens?
Yeah, so that is a lovely chapter in my life. Lots of good military experiences there, and at the same time, I'm building up my CV and my experiences in the commercial world. I've had 2 or 3 employed jobs after the fraudulent company that I joined to do that selling.
Just before I go on to that, actually, I just wanted to end this chapter, because it may be that if you hadn't been kicked out of the army, would you have seen yourself having a lifetime career in the army?
Yes, and there's a distinction between the army and the Marines, of course. Yeah. The Marines are the Navy soldiers.
Okay.
So I was employed by the Navy as a Royal Marine. Had to win my Green Beret and become a Royal Marine Commando, and I was destined as an officer to serve 35 years.
And that's what you wanted?
Yeah, that's what I wanted, and that's what I aspired to do from the age of 12. But and
for that dream, but that's what's very interesting. So.
I had a full career service commission. So,
And for that, at such a young age, to be sort of taken away, means that and then you have nothing else.
Rug pulled.
Absolutely. And nothing else to fall back onto. Because you could think about as a 12-year-old with that actual, that's what I want to do.
Funnily enough, when I went to the Admiralty interview board for the final assessment and selection process, 5,000 candidates wanting one of the 15, 16 places.
This is when you were joining up.
When I was joining, I was sat in front of all these senior naval and marine officers, and a lady officer turned to me and said, Mr. Laughton, if we don't offer you one of these places, CTC Limpston, what will you do? And it was a question, honestly, I hadn't even considered. And so I kind of stuttered. I remember this precisely. I stuttered and mumbled and suddenly had to think, creatively. And they could obviously see that I hadn't even prepared for that question, which I think was a positive in the end, because I stumbled out that I'd be, I don't know, a stuntman, I said.
Oh, a stuntman, you said. So that's really, so for me, that's what it's really trying to really focus on. What a tremendous loss it was if you sort of focus on something, and circumstances means that you have to change. I think that is the thing is pretty admirable. And then, so you then go and start, so you go, and then the first step into business is quite a fraudulent business. So again, that's quite an interesting learning ground. How do you find your feet then? How do you find what's the next thing for you?
Well, an interesting thing happened, and it was a conscious decision, because I'd been in the lowest of the low commercial experiences with a pretty dodgy company. But I'd done 2.5 years, and had built up a fair amount of good sales commission. Then, of course, when the fraud happened, the company went into liquidation. I happened to be on a safari at the time, and all my freelance colleagues went into the warehouse and stocked their vans up with goods and chattels to compensate for the loss of 6 months of sales commission. Of course, I was in Africa, so I missed the boat. So I came back and absolutely, I'd lost half a year's worth of commissions and work. So that was pretty tough as well. And but I recognised it was, again, a catalyst moment where you think, do I want to be in this industry? Do I want to, have another experience like this? And the other point was my job was selling stationery and office equipment, printing to kind of office managers at best, and occasionally kind of receptionists. Nothing wrong with that per se, but I aspired to do business with people like you, Wilfred.
Okay.
Senior executives, minimum, hopefully CEOs, chief executives, founders of businesses. And I realized that I'd never be able to do that selling stationery. Do you know what I mean? So I switched industry. I said, what industry will get me as a sales bloke in front of CEOs? And I chose construction because I realized the big ticket items, lots of money in construction and building buildings. That's where I need to be. So there's another story of how I got the next job.
I'd love to hear that story because, again, the way you tell your stories, you tell it as though it's a normal thing to do, but it isn't. To suddenly decide, actually, I could only do that because I started off, for example, as a chef.
Oh, okay.
And so I left school without any qualifications. I joined the army. I got kicked out of the army because, I was a mouthy git. Then I went into sort of catering, and then I decided actually I was never really going to get into a position to buy my farm catering. I needed to go into career. So I then decided I want to go and work for the BBC as a producer director. Now one is saying it and there's one that's doing it. And in order to do it, I can remember writing to everybody and no one would answer my letters. And what I did is that I was in Birmingham at the time, and there's a place called Pebble Studios. I went and chatted up the security guards to say, look, can I help you open these gates, letting people in and out? They said yes. I then met the cleaners and I went and cleaned the offices. And then I met a guy, and I still remember his name to this day. His name was Jock Gallagher, and I was very enthusiastic. I'd really love to get a job in television. He took me up to his office. He spoke to me for about an hour, and he says, look, you're not the type of person we employ because you don't have the education, and you've got a bit of an attitude problem. He said, but I'll give you a job as a runner for 3 months and see what happens. And that guy giving me that break then started off a long career
That's
in
all
television.
you need, isn't it?
But the point I'm making is the drive.
Yeah.
So a lot of people will give up.
Sure.
And what I'm interested is the drive that, so to go from, well, I want to go from this to that in terms I want to go into construction to see, that's what I'm interested in. So you were going to tell me a story about how you managed to get into that.
Yeah, of course, I knew nobody in the construction industry, but I thought, I'm in London. What's the biggest development that's happening in London at the time? And you might remember, it's Broadgate in Liverpool Street. And so I did some research. I discovered that, Stanhope Rose Hall were the developer. Who was building it? Well, there's a number of different subcontractors and contractors. And I drilled down and I found a managing director of a commercial interiors business, which is what I felt I would quite like to do, designing and building and fitting out and furnishing offices and stuff. And I picked up the phone and I managed to get myself an interview because this...
Did you manage to speak to him directly?
I can't remember if I'm honest, but I got the interview. He was the managing director. It was a reasonably newish business. I think they were turning over a couple of million, something like that. Not an awful lot, but had great aspirations, and I was attracted to that. And I was applying for a sales marketing manager's job. And the managing director, interviewed me for half an hour or so and then said, well, I clearly, asked me similar sort of questions to you. I can see that you've got drive and ambition, Mr. Laughton, but I can't give you a job because you have no experience in the construction industry. So I thought about this for a moment. I clearly saw I was being shown the door. So I said, well, hold on. If I come and work for you for 2 weeks free of charge, completely, no risk to yourself, I will come and work with you and for you for 2 weeks. And if you like what you see, will you give me the job? He said, yeah, sure. So I did. I worked for 2 weeks, flat out. Came up with some fairly good strategies, one of which was a game changer. because I did get the job. Yeah.
So what were the strategies that you came up with, which was a game
Well,
changer?
I came up with this idea where this particular business needed lots of third-party, approval. So when you're in the commercial interiors and fit out and furniture game, you need the architect, you need the project managers, you need the construction managers, you need the engineers, all saying, we'll have that company do the job. So you need friends in high places. And this managing director and his young small team had a number of contacts, but not that many. And so within the 2 weeks, I kind of discovered what was what, and I came up with this strategy. Every Tuesday and a Thursday evening, 5:30, I would phone an architect, an engineer, and a thing. I'd line up all these meetings. And what we would do with the MD, we would go in at 5:30, encourage all the people in the office to come into the boardroom, and we would do a 15-minute presentation between us, tell all these people about what we were, what we did, and then I'd open some chilled white wine and have some cheese on sticks and give these people a glass of wine before their journeys home. And we made friends, we made contacts. They got an opportunity to really understand what it was that we needed as a business, what opportunities, tenders, etc. And within 18 months of starting as sales and marketing manager of this particular firm, the order book went, 2 million turnover, less than that. It went to about 15 or 16 million in 18 months.
That's amazing.
Just with that strategy.
And that strategy is about the importance of relationships.
Correct.
Absolutely. So a glass of wine and some cheese is all about relationships. It's the essential tool for business. I think that's phenomenal. But also what's interesting about that story is how you actually invest in yourself. The courage to be able to say, don't pay me for 2 weeks. I will, give me 2 weeks and to prove yourself. Again, that is a very sort of entrepreneurial thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, it came on the spot because obviously I was put under a situation where I clearly wasn't going to get the job. It wasn't being given me an opportunity. And so it was sort of backs against the wall. I obviously clearly thought that I quite liked to work there, and it just came to me as a solution.
Do you think you're entrepreneurial?
Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah.
So what do you think what are the tools to be entrepreneurial?
I think if you want to be an entrepreneur, you have to be able to take risks. You have to have some sort of idea. I think you can pivot, as to use your words earlier. You can pivot, but you've got to have that drive to be able to start from nothing, have nothing, create opportunities from a puff of smoke, an idea, whatever it might be, talent. You're obviously into, growing carrots. I mean, unlike you, I would never be a chef because I can ruin an egg.
Oh, right.
But, I think, am I answering your question? You need to have an idea, a spark, a drive and determination to build a business.
But so the question actually I'm asking, can a person become an entrepreneur or is it genetic?
Yeah, that is a good question. I'm probably not clever enough to answer it correctly. I would guess that you would need 50% in your DNA to be entrepreneurial, and 50% you can learn, you can gain experience, and you can learn from others if you have open curiosity.
Because it's all about mindset. If you think about everything you've done, it's not about the qualifications, it's about a mindset.
What qualifications?
I don't have any qualifications at all. And so what I always wonder really is that perhaps the more educated a person is, whether that's a disadvantage because they've been taught how to operate within certain parameters, whereas an entrepreneurial mind is always coming up with solutions outside parameters. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's why I'm most interested in, is that a genetic trait, or is it something that's come from the suffering, from having to overcome? So that's what I mean by all of the experiences.
I think it's a combination of all sorts of things, and once education's important, it's not the be all and end all. I keep telling my children who are going through nasty exams at the moment that just try your best, do your best, and I keep telling them when they get a bad grade that nobody has ever asked me what grade pass I got at maths or English GCSE.
Yeah.
Not a single person in my entire career has asked me what grade I took, what I got.
Exactly.
As long as you pass and you get through the hurdle of the interview and so forth, it doesn't really matter.
So you go into that business and you obviously help them increase their sort of turnover. How long were you there for? And
I was there for exactly 18 months because what happened then, unfortunately, I was also serving in the military at the time. I think, and I discovered this afterwards, I was brought in for a 7:30 meeting with the boss. Things were going really well, had a great order book of 16, 17 million. And I was given my P45 and told to bugger off. Just like that, out the blue. I thought I was going in for a normal early morning, Monday morning briefing, but I left with, tail between the legs and just utter confusion as to why I'd been summarily dismissed. And it wasn't until a few years later I realized that the boss, his best mate was in the industry. And he now wanted my job. And of course, being his best mate, he got it.
God, that's pretty gutting, that is.
It was
basically
pretty tough. But again, I told you earlier that when I was dismissed from that job, that was the moment where I went, sod it, I'm going to start my own business. And that was the catalyst. If I hadn't, I'd be an employee to this day.
So there's always been things driving you actually to end up doing what you eventually did.
Yes, and circumstance and opportunities and disappointments that have created my pathway.
And so you then obviously lose that job, and then you decide, right, I'm going to do my own thing. Explain what that was.
Well, it was setting up a business in direct competition with my former colleagues and boss.
That's a really good way of actually, making a mark, really. So
it's a way of going 2 fingers to you, and I'll see you, on some client tenders.
And so, how did that business go then? How did that?
Mine?
Work? Yes.
Yes. Well, first of all, theirs went really well. They became the market leader, so I backed a good horse. But we did our best. They were in the Premiership, if you like, 10 years later, and I built a business from scratch. And it was slow organic growth. I wasn't clever enough to do acquisitions or, that kind of stuff. So it was slow growth over 10 years, but we built back up to about 20 million turnover business. And then some interesting things happened, and we doubled that. I eventually sold it to a FTSE 100 company.
You see, this is where I have to pause, because when you look at your life, and and all the things that you had gone through and all the things you've had to overcome, then to actually be able to create a company that you then sell to a FTSE 100 company, you say it as though it's the easiest thing in the world. But my God, there is something that is driven in you.
There's drive, there's luck, there's opportunity, there's aspiration, there's disappointment. Yeah, there's lots of things.
But you could give a number of people the same set of circumstances, and they would have actually chosen a different route. They wouldn't have been able to enjoy. There's so many things along the line that could have tripped somebody else up, but somehow you were able to keep going to actually end up in a position to succeed. And that's what I find quite fascinating, because everything about you, it looks as though you had it easy, but it's been pretty tough.
Just by looking at me, I've had an easy life. Silver spoon.
Exactly. Yeah. That is what I mean.
Looks can be deceiving, Wilfred.
Well, exactly. You see, you don't have, you can't say that you're a woman or you're black or anything like that. You've people look at you and they'll assume that you've had some sort of privilege, and not realizing that actually your success has come by being working hard and overcoming.
And something else I think is important, particularly nowadays, and I've got 3 teenagers who are glued to their bloody phones.
Exactly right.
You've got to look up. I see so many people on the tube just in their own world with their phone. You've got to look up and around and meet people. Just on the way here, I saw a girl wearing a Alaska Girl T-shirt. So overcoat thing. So I said, are you from Alaska? And she said, no, I just bought this jacket from the store, and had a conversation with her about Alaska, and she might one day go to Alaska now. But most people don't have those sort of those engagements now. It's too insular.
Yeah.
And I was on a plane once 25 years ago, and how you get your book and you put your earphones in, and well, I didn't. I engaged the person on my left in the middle seat. And we're in economy. I don't know what he was doing in economy, because he ran a very successful investment bank. And I chatted him up. He took a shine to me, and he ended up as my major expedition sponsor for 10 years.
I tell you, that's really interesting, because that's where opportunities come.
Yes.
By looking up.
And that's not luck. That is, as I'm saying with this analogy of get out of your phone, engage people, look them in the eye, talk to them.
It is.
You never know who you're going to sit next to.
And I've just written an article for the Oldie magazine on this very subject.
Good.
About actually how in our company, where is he? Tom, I'm always the young people, they will do things by text or by email. And I'm always saying, what do I say, Tom? Pick up the fucking phone. Pick up the fucking phone.
Oh, I didn't know we were allowed to swear in this podcast.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I'm sure you can. But it is the biggest thing, because actually what human beings need is connection and relationships. That's how things get done.
Wilfred. Quite agree.
So it's really interesting looking at your story, is that even though you had all of these sort of experiences, what it actually taught you is the gift of actually human relationships, because
communication, engagement,
all of that sort of stuff is quite important. So you've got to the position where you create a company and then you sell it. Then what happens? What next?
Well, I suppose at this stage I'm approaching 45 and thinking, what do I do next? And feeling the entrepreneurial spirit, I decide that I don't want to. I had previously employed hundreds of people in this construction business. I then decide that I don't want to now employ lots of people.
And why is that?
Well, without being rude, it's quite, it's a bit like in the military. When you rise up the rank, you stop doing the fun stuff like sneaking around bushes and rescuing damsels in distress from a burning building or whatever, and you end up planning the next exercise or mission, paperwork. And it's the same in business. When you're running a business and you're employing hundreds of people, you spend your entire life, or what seems to be your entire life, managing people's expectations and managing people. And it's tiring and sometimes slightly depressing. And you're not on the front line doing what you set out to do in the first place. And that's a long answer to explain that.
But
I'd rather just scale back, become a consultant, for better or worse, and work on a model of associates rather than employees.
And I tell you, as an employee, one of the most difficult things about running a business are people.
Yeah,
people are a fucking pain in the arse,
Oh, and there we go. Some more swearing, great.
Yeah, they are. And
you said it, not me. But yeah, you're right.
Yeah,
it's hard work.
It's hard work, and it's about how do when you find the right people, they are like gold.
It's fantastic when it works out. But when you've got moaning minis in there and just they're knocking on your door every single other week, demanding this and demanding that, then it just comes very tiring. And I'd done it for 20 years, and I just thought I'll do something a little bit different. Yeah,
well, I just think it's an interesting thing to explore really on this podcast, because what happens is that work becomes one of the most important things in people's lives.
Not for me.
Not for us.
Not for me.
Not for us. But for a lot of people, the reason they've got a job is because they don't have the courage to go and do their own thing, and therefore they want so much out of the job that a job can't give. I mean, in terms of all their emotional state and all that sort of stuff. So therefore, you could see that a lot of business and the big corporates have to invest so much in, as you say, managing people's expectation. If you're a startup and you've got a startup mentality, what you want is people who could fly and run with you and enjoying the adventure.
Yeah.
Rather than a place where actually, you just come to sort of put your head down, really.
I mean, I think from what I'm hearing, the issue is that some entrepreneurs are so enwrapped in their business that everything else suffers, family, relationships, friendships, and so forth. And the same for, as you've discovered, employees. You can have nothing else. It is your one and only thing, and I think that's dangerous. I personally, and I implore anyone that's involved with me to have outside interest, to put family first. Almost then your passion, whatever it is, trains, planes, automobiles, and then work, and put the same amount of energy and passion that you put into family, but not exclusively.
So it's about balance. But it depends where you are in your journey. So when you would have started up in your business, you've got it has to be, it's a bit like a newborn child. You've got to actually focus your energies into this child surviving. As they get older, you don't need to be, constantly on alert in case something would go wrong. And I think businesses are a bit like that. Or I say to people, go and see someone in intensive care, where and I've been in intensive care, and I've been in a coma for about a week, and everything is focused on that person surviving. And then after a while, then everybody take a breather, and then the business has a chance to evolve into something that's no longer.
Yeah, that's different stages of growth and requirements to time in the business. But you started, and I think this podcast is success is not normal.
Is success? Yeah, success not normal.
Well, for me, exactly 1 year after starting my business, I told my team that I was disappearing for 8 weeks to go to the Himalayas in Nepal to climb a large mountain. That's not normal.
No.
But that's what I did, because it was important to me at that moment in time to go and climb that mountain, and to leave and delegate all my responsibilities and duties, and trust my team to carry on running the business as I had set out.
So it's about, I think all business is about, what is the tone of voice? What is the mindset that business has? And what would you say that your business mindset is?
Which business? The construction?
The construction business.
Well, I think we were toiling away, just trying to make I describe it as, at the time, being in the top of the second division, to use a footballing analogy. And I aspired us to be in the Premiership. It was as simple as that. So, whatever we did, we looked to be up in the Premiership. But it was a long old journey and a struggle to get there. But everyone knew the direction of travel, knew what the ultimate goal was, so that there could be no misunderstanding of where we needed to get to, one way and another.
What I'm trying to work out is, what was your passion? Because it seems to me there are two passions. There is the adventurer. Is that your greater love, and then business second, or they're both equal?
Well, I love, if you've done any research, you'll know that I love an expedition, an adventure, a journey, a challenge. But if I'm honest, business is also one of those. It's different to climbing a mountain or rowing a sea or whatever, paddling around, Easter Island on a paddleboard. It's a different challenge, but it's still a journey, and it's still challenging, and it's still adventurous and fun.
So but if you had to choose, which one would you sacrifice?
Oh, the work.
The work. So therefore your greater passion is the adventure.
But ironically, I turned down many times an opportunity to be a full-time professional adventurer. So figure that out.
Because I suppose the thing about adventuring is that it's a pleasure. The moment it becomes a job,
good.
It will have a different meaning.
Yeah,
and that's why you've always turned it down, because it would then take away the pleasure.
Correct. You've very accurately answered one half of the answer. Yeah. The other was, I knew from experience that the people in that world, exploration, adventure, expeditions, didn't earn an awful lot of money.
Oh, right, I see. So you sort of decided that actually you'll keep it as something as your personal pleasure.
I can make more money in construction and property and development and selling furniture to offices. But
it'd be quite interesting that if there was a way to make money, a lot of money out of it, do you think that would have then become your...
It might have tempted me, for sure.
Yeah, right. So, but the key thing I've got to is that everybody needs to have a passion.
Yes.
And so we've identified what your passion is, and that's sort of driven you.
Yeah, and I'm sure a lot of people listening will go, well, that's great, but how do you find your passion? And that's a difficult question. I think my answer would be try lots of different things. Parachuting when you're 16, trying to grow carrots, try lots of different things as I have done. And I think eventually you will come across something that you are passionate about.
I tell you, here's the theory. Do you think it is possible to find your passion, or will your passion find you?
It's a bit hysterical question, which again I'm not probably clever enough to answer. I just think if you're out there, if you're curious, if you're receptive to opportunities and experiences, something will happen that allow you to suddenly realize, to discover what it is that's important to you, maybe find your purpose, maybe find something that you just believe in, that you want to do something to help humanity, your community, people around you, or try and cure cancer.
One of the things the picture I've got in my mind is that 12-year-old boy where that helicopter comes to pick them up, take them onto a destroyer. You could see how that could really implant something in someone's mind.
Yep.
Because it gives a sense of pleasure. You could see how that then becomes something that travels throughout your sort of life. I'm just thinking about me as that kid in my father's allotment, being in this environment of sort of freedom, that it really triggered wanting to continuously have those sort of experiences, really. So that's why I'm interested in whether something comes along that triggers your passion rather than you decide what it is. I don't know what the answer is.
For me, it was that. But, you know, there have been many other stages of my life and career where, you know, other opportunities, you know, I've just signed up to do a 24-hour penny farthing ride for charity. You know, how the hell did I end up doing that? But that follows opportunity, passion, curiosity, and
it makes sense to me, though. You know, you telling me to do that makes sense to me because it's endurance. It ticks all those all the similar boxes. Just tell me, when did you get married? Because you said you've had children. Tell me about that. How did you meet your wife?
I found somebody that agreed to marry me.
How old were you then?
I was 44, I think. 44, yeah.
All right, so she didn't have to endure all of those great adventures.
No, I'd sort of ticked off all the difficult missions that, and I'd finished with the military by then, of course, and so, you know, spent a bit more time as more of a family man, and we had 3 children in quick succession. That's been another interesting life challenge.
Well, you see, what's interesting for me then, because it must be really difficult for your partner. I mean, to be living with anybody that runs a business is quite tough. To then add on top of it an adventurer, you know, that is living always within a state of uncertainty. You know, how does she endure that? Or is she of the similar type?
She's an amazing character that understands that what drives my passions is important, and gives me space, time, and permission, green ticket, to go off and do them. And I'm very fortunate, and I don't take it for granted. You know, she often is the brunt, as my mother was before her, when a disaster occurred on a mountain or at the North Pole or wherever it was. You know, they're the ones suffering back at home. You're in the midst of a crisis, and, you know, your brain's engaged to get yourself out of it, but they just have to sit and worry. So I'm always conscious that those loved ones left back at home, you know, also, you know, should have the accolade of the other half of an adventurer.
Well, it is, because I mean, it's tough. It's what I call beside the bed. You know, they're the ones that have to endure what could potentially go wrong. And your children, how old are your children?
They're all teenagers.
So they're about 18, 19?
No, they're 15, 14, 13.
All right, so they're proper teenagers then. And then back about this theme of entrepreneurialism, do you think any of them have the entrepreneurial gene, or you don't know yet?
I haven't, if I'm honest, I haven't detected any major entrepreneurialism within them. Not yet, anyway. But I'm very conscious of not throwing my experiences. I think that it's tough enough as a teenager these days to, you know, every teenager thinks your parents are embarrassing and so forth. So I kind of, you know, I give love, support and encouragement, but I don't, I don't say you must, I think you'll be a great banker, or, you should go into sports management, or, I'll just leave them to it. They'll find their way. I'm not that concerned. They've, luckily enough, given them a good education, and they'll find their way.
Okay, so at the moment you're saying you're operating as a consultant. So you go in and consulting what sort of consulting?
Well, I think it's a misnomer. Actually, I set up in business as a consultant, but actually I'm more of an advisor. I have 2 or 3 different businesses now. To answer an earlier question, I've set up a business trying to bring floating homes to the market in the next couple of years. I run a penny farthing club. I'm chairman of a charity, and my advisory consultant element is really just giving back to people in a similar position. Entrepreneurs, CEOs, company directors, all have got different stages of their journeys, and I run a CEO group of 25, 30 members, and I help them out, and we meet monthly, and people interact and socialize, and we do more than networking. We help each other and we support each other, and we learn and share our experiences.
So most of the people that you would mix in who become CEOs, they're not necessarily entrepreneurs. They're probably very good at managing businesses.
Yeah, they're mostly business owners, though.
Oh, right, I see.
So it depends on your criteria for entrepreneurialism. I think anybody who starts a business
is an entrepreneur.
It has to be an element of entrepreneur there.
I would absolutely agree with that. And so if a young person was coming to you now and saying, right, what advice would you give starting off in a business? What would you be saying to them? What are the key things they will need in order to try and make that business work?
So I try not to give a global slick overview statement of what things you need to do, or things that you need to think about, or actually physically end up doing, because everybody is different. And I know from my experiences, we did this UCAS or whatever it was, career advisory thing. Do you know what I mean? And they did, honestly. My dad actually complained. He said, I spent all this money and it comes back, you're going to be a banker. And, he just received, the news that I'd failed my GCSE maths for the second time with a U grade. Do you know what I mean? There's no chance he's going to be a banker. I've just paid £100 for my son to do this ridiculous career development assessment stuff. So I try not to be too prescriptive. But if I'm advising young people, old people, anybody, who might want to listen, my experience, I think you have to have a vision. If you can try and find something that's different with your service, with your product, a bit of innovation is good. You've got to have a plan, create a strategy. Team is important. People around you, we talked about it earlier. Find good people. And there's obviously a major challenge in that. You start with the best that you can get, and then you grow out of them, or the business grows out of them, and then you have to change them over to somebody else, and that can cause difficulties. But generally speaking, get good people around you. And then finally, it's this business of a positive attitude. And I wrap that up in a kind of an acrostic word called VISTA, which the dictionary will tell you means a pleasing view or ambition. That's what VISTA means. And VISTA stands for vision, innovation, strategy, team, and attitude.
But if you look at what's happened in your life, you wouldn't have said, this is what I wanted to do. Actually, what you've done is that you've actually seized opportunities.
Yeah, in part. I mean, I had that aspiration to be a Marine from the age of 12.
Yeah.
I consciously went from printing stationery industry to construction. I purposely had to go from employed to unemployed and self-employed.
So were there visions, or was it circumstances that pushed you into doing these things?
But in part, I think elements of both.
So what I'm thinking is that does flexibility play a big part? Because sometimes people are so fixed with an idea that they lose opportunities because they can't flex.
Yeah, I think flexibility is a good quality to have for sure. And like we talked earlier, if you're going down a path and there's too many roadblocks, obviously, serious roadblocks, then you might want to pivot. You might want to deflect to a different path or a different opportunity or try something new.
Mm-hmm. So, in concluding this podcast, then, would you say that you are normal?
No, I would say I'm probably. I wouldn't want to necessarily say I'm abnormal, but I definitely follow my own path. I would caveat that by saying if 90% of the population is normal, I'm one of the 10%.
Okay, I would absolutely agree. So it's really nice to welcome one of the 5%. I just think we are.
Okay.
Yeah,
whatever the percentage is.
We are a small breed because most people feel more comfortable being part of the pack rather than following their own course. So thank you very much for coming along. I've really enjoyed our chat.
Wilfred, very nice to meet you.
It's been
Thank
really
you.
great. Thanks a lot. You have been listening to myself, Wilfred Emmanuel Jones, or better known as the Black Farmer. This was the Success is Not Normal podcast. Stay tuned for the next week's episode.